So for many people, July 2027 is just going to be a date in a calendar. But for many property investors, it now forms a pivotal date that most people will be using to reconsider what they are doing. And a lot of people in the industry are talking about this as the 2027 investor cliff, which is basically when investment properties changed forever. So obviously what happened and what changed? The change was that the government made a decision to affect the way that people invest, how they're going to invest, what they're going to invest in, and how long they're going to hold these properties. Now, the main change that I'm talking about today is the capital gains tax discount change. And this is the thing that has nearly all property investors looking at each one of their properties and deciding, is this a property I actually want to keep long term? So that's what we're going to unpack today. Let's have a chat through the things that are running through investors' minds and what they are considering whether they're deciding to just offload those properties before July 2027 or they're going to keep them for a long-term hold. So what is this cliff everyone's talking about? Well, let's keep it simple and have a look at the facts. Up until July 2027, you can claim your capital gains tax discount of 50% on all of your existing properties. From July 2027, you can only have new properties moving forward that will get the same 50% discount. So what this means is that every existing property investor will have to relook at what their asset is worth in the lead up to July 2027 and then work out whether they cut bait at that point in time and move on, or they hold the asset and then entertain having the new calculation put over the remaining capital gain they make on the property from 2027 to whenever they decide to sell it, and have that under the new rules where your capital gain is indexed with inflation. Now, what this means is that for a lot of current owners, they will be just thinking about selling their property now before any of the new rules come in place. This is especially for clients who think that the property has done its work and they can sell it now, get a reasonable price, make a reasonable amount of money. They don't have to fuss with the new calculations and they can just move on with their life and pay the smallest amount of tax possible. Now, with the CGT discount continuing for new properties, you've got to have a look at what the government is actually trying to do. They are, in fact, actually trying to get investors to do this. Sell the current one, move that out into owner-occupied housing stock, and then repurpose those funds into a new property that has these new has the exact same discounts applied that you're so used to. And a lot of people will be doing this, and that's why we will see this massive transition from existing holding stock to new property investor stock over the next 12 months. The government is using this tool to basically manipulate the market, free up stock in one area and create demand in another area. And the reason that the cliff exists is there's a certain number of investors that simply won't follow the government's direction. They're just going to sell because of their age and lifestyle and get out altogether. And that cliff will see the number of investment properties in established areas fall dramatically. So most property investors at the moment are faced with the dilemma. And the dilemma is, do I sell or do I keep holding the asset? And if I sell, what do I do? And if I hold the asset, what do I do? So those investors that are looking at selling, they're either looking at following one or two paths. Path number one is they just sell and get out, take their capital gain and move on with their lives and be happy. Option number two is they'll sell and then repurpose the funds into a new investment, which is also fine. The next one is, if I stay and if I keep my investment, then what? Now, for some people, that will work quite well for them because, it's got to a certain level of capital gain. They know they get a 50% discount on that. And they don't expect it to do too much in the future, but they still want to hold the asset because they think it's got long-term potential. Now, if you do that, the incentive or the change to the CGT means that it's indexed with inflation. So the longer you hold the asset, the better it is, because obviously the more compounding inflation you get over the period of time means the less CGT that you're going to pay at the end. Now, for most of these people that are deciding that they will hold, they are factoring in that they will hold it beyond the original period of time that they initially wanted to keep the property for, and that they are forecasting that they will need some of the funds from that property earlier than when they actually anticipate on selling it. So we end up with this scenario where those that are thinking about keeping the property are also thinking about how they're going to leverage the equity from it to be able to fund their lifestyle or retirement before they actually sell the property, which I think opens up a really good opportunity for some investors that have been caught up in this, and they're actually thinking, well, now my plan is not to sell early, but actually to hold for quite a long time, so long as I can get access to the equity from it and borrow against that property to fund lifestyle. Most investors, when it comes to looking at the properties that they hold and the properties that they want to keep and the properties that they want to sell, can't see the wood for the trees. So here's a few things just to think about in terms of prioritizing which ones you're going to keep and which ones you're going to sell. If you've got a property that hasn't done too much in capital growth to this point in time, and you think it might be a bit of a dud, you really held high hopes for it, but it didn't, the area didn't improve as you thought it would, and it really hasn't performed, that's an ideal property to sell. Because at the moment, you've only made a little bit of money. Let's not give the ATO any more of that money than they absolutely need to. We need as much of that money as we possibly can. If it does shoot up in value in the future, then your future capital growth will all be at that higher rate of CGT. So it won't really accomplish what you set out to do in the first place. So if it hasn't performed, if it is a dud, if it hasn't made you money, sell it now, move on with your life. That's probably number one. Number two is keeping assets, and some clients have bought me specific assets where they think that the property has performed really well. That particular property is now decreasing in value or going to sit flat for a period of time, but they think maybe it might have a tail on it towards the end in terms of capital growth. Now, these are assets where the current explanation given to us is that there will be a valuation done at that point. You will have to pay capital gains tax on the capital growth that's been made. And then if that property sits flat, but then the CGT is indexed on top of that, well, we might end up with a situation where you have so much CG to pay here, but you actually have a negative calculation in the next couple of years. And that might also benefit you because you've got a plus and a minus in your CGT calculation. This is one that's been posed to me by a couple of accountants. I think it's quite interesting in terms of it helps then slightly offset the CGT calculation that you're currently looking at. You're in fact almost having two properties calculations for the one property, one prior to July 2027 and one post July 2027. So if you think that is your situation, that might be a property that you hold on to and keep for a little bit longer. The next one that you would definitely keep is if you've got a property in your portfolio that meets all of the kind of golden checklist examples of location, infrastructure, spending, long-term capital growth, good rental income. If you own the 3-bedroom in Bondi that you paid very little for back in the day, and you think it will continue to perform for the next 20 years, then you definitely keep that property. Because regardless of taxation, that is a property worth keeping for the very, very long term. It is a blue chip asset that provides for itself, and we don't want to offload that now because the future for that property is still bright regardless of whatever taxation is taken into consideration. So let's talk about lending strategies for the properties that we're going to keep. If we are keeping, this blue chip property that we really want to keep a hold of, we think it's great, and it's going to suit all of our needs moving into the future, then what we need to consider is let's have a look at your loan application now and your ability to borrow against that blue chip asset. Now, the reason that this is potentially something that you should be doing earlier rather than later is uncertainty. No one knows what the banks are going to be able to do in terms of releasing equity against properties in the future, especially if they're investment properties. If they are investment properties that are predating July 2027, when you had negative gearing able to be used in the servicing calculation, but you are trying to extract equity against that property post July 2027, does the servicing calculation, when you're trying to access equity, allow for negative gearing? Because negative gearing on existing properties is dead and buried at that point in time. So because of this uncertainty, a lot of investors are now considering whether they should have their properties revalued right now and extract as much equity as they possibly can against those properties right now, because it will give them a degree of certainty. They know what the current value of the property is. They know what the current equity in the property is. They know what the current debt servicing calculations are, and they know how much money they can get a hold of right now. They don't know what that property is worth in 3 years once these changes come into play. They don't know what their rents will be in 3 years' time once the changes come into play, and they don't know what the lender's appetite and credit policy is going to be like in 3 years' time once these changes come into play. So at the moment, we are seeing a large amount of inquiry for existing property investors that have determined which properties they're going to hold, and they are already trying to leverage against those properties to create buffers for the future. These might be buffers to help maintain their property portfolio, or it might actually be funds that they want to fund their lifestyle in the future. Whatever it is, now is a good time to think about this and have a look at it and see if it's appropriate for your set of circumstances. So in conclusion, the 2027 property investor cliff is not a reason to panic, but it certainly is a reason to plan. I think the investors that do really well over the next 5 years will be those that formulate a strategy and a plan very early on and then implement that plan. I think doing things earlier rather than later. Don't follow the crowd, but have a think about the fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve, and sitting down with someone, running through those ideas, and then working out what your capabilities are right now will be the thing that separates good investors from great investors. So if you want to sit down with someone and have a chat about how these changes could affect you, your portfolio, your ability to borrow, your ability to leverage equity, and your ability to fund your future lifestyle or fund your future investment property purchases, reach out, have a chat with myself or one of my team. We'd be more than happy to run you through the math and numbers and explain to you how the changes could affect you and what your capacity is going to be in the future.